Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. So welcome to Ingenie, to our African EdTech Community Event, the first of this year, and we hope to make this an annual thing, so welcome back next year as well. Thank you. My name's Krista Davidson. I'm the executive head at Ingenie, and I've been supported by my amazing team who you'll meet tonight, I hope. And yeah, thank you so much for being here in person. I know this is super strange to have a live audience, especially for me. Yeah, it's just been such a long few years with Zoom webinars, and we thought it was about time to see some faces in the flesh. So thanks again for coming in. Ooh, we lost our stream here. Yeah, I'm going to just walk you through a bit about Ingenie and very quickly tell you what to expect for the rest of the day. And then you will get to our keynote address by Rob Paddock, who I will introduce in just a moment. So just to kick off sort of what else is happening today and what has happened already, we've had a really busy day with some private sort of in-person segments, a focus group discussion that was speaking about working with the public sector as an EdTech entrepreneur, how we can make that partnership more successful. It's been super impressive for me to hear all these really interesting contributions from members of our ecosystem. And we'll be making that available publicly in the coming weeks, so make sure you're subscribed to our mailing list so you can receive those links and check out the other work that we're doing as well. We previously had a kickoff breakfast with some members of the ecosystem, and we are super excited now to kick off with our keynote address on what works in EdTech in Africa. So Rob will be doing that just now, and we're going to follow that up with a panel discussion about really balancing the impact and commercial returns that we find so difficult in African EdTech specifically. Oh, and please, if you feel welcome to connect to our Wi-Fi and make sure you're tweeting and Facebook posting and doing all the things on social media. You can tag us at Ingenie EdTech and hashtag Ingenie Event 2021, please. So, for those of you who don't know, Ingenie is all about improving educational outcomes across the continent. We really exist for that purpose, to increase quality, accessibility, and relevance of education on the continent. And we believe that the way to do that is by empowering EdTech entrepreneurs who really understand the challenges most and can really design the most appropriate solutions for those challenges. But it's not just entrepreneurs that are important in this process. We also depend on other stakeholders, on public sector, on other private partners, and we hope to bring them all together in ecosystem events like this and other work that we're doing. So very quickly, a look at what we've done so far. Ingenie started out as an incubation program, and we ran 4 cohorts over the first 4 years of our existence. And through that, we worked with 29 amazing startups. Some of the alumni are in the crowd now, and we're really happy to stay engaged with all of those entrepreneurs and continue to see them making an impact in their communities. We also are super proud to say that almost all of those companies are still active and making a difference in the markets they serve, which is amazing for us to see that initial bit of confidence that we gave them at the beginning potentially helped them to make it this far. And finally, we are truly Pan-African. We've supported companies very directly across 10 different African countries, and we continue to support very early stage entrepreneurs in the edtech space across the continent, and have done so with nearly 300 early stage edtech entrepreneurs in 200 edtech startups. So that's just really since 2019, specifically on that last point. So we're really proud of that. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce Robert Paddock, who is the founder and CEO of Valenture Institute. Previously, you might know him as being the co-founder of Get Smarter, which had quite a successful exit a few years back. But I will let Rob introduce himself properly and tell you a little bit more about what he's going to speak about today. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Krista. Lovely, lovely, lovely to be with you all here today. Thank you so much for coming. As Krista mentioned, my name is Rob Paddock. I have had the great fortune of being in education technology since 2006. And the topic of today's conversation is what works in EdTech in Africa. And I guess the kind of classic management consultant response is, well, it depends. So I'm hoping, rather than trying to give you any sort of definitive guidance on what works in EdTech, rather speak you through some of the experiences I've had directly in education technology, try to pull out some of the thematic factors that have made those businesses either work or not work, and there's been a lot of things that haven't worked, and then also try to speak to a couple of other businesses that I've had the privilege of seeing and having sight of over the years, and hopefully again pulling out some of the themes that I think make EdTech such an exciting prospect for this continent. Before I go there, I do just want to make a couple of points around the continent and education right now, and why education technology really matters now, like more than ever before. So a couple of stats that are keeping me awake at night at the moment. 45% of the world's youth population will be on the African continent by 2030. That's not quite 8 full years away. 45% of the global youth population. In a country like South Africa, 43% of our teachers, these are primary and secondary school teachers, will be retiring in the next 10 years. We have this disproportionate age distribution of teachers in our country, and we're not producing nearly as many new teachers coming into the system as that are leaving right now. And so just that alone, you put those two things together and you think to yourself, what the heck are we going to do? Another stat that's really scary, if we had to build enough schools and train enough teachers, we'd need to train 350,000 new teachers every single year on the African continent just to keep up with the current brick and mortar teacher to learner ratios. We're producing about 70,000 teachers a year across the continent at this rate. So we're like way off. Way off. And this is just primary and secondary schooling. Very similar dynamics exist for tertiary education, for continuous professional development. We've got this radical disparity between what our traditional system is able to produce and is able to offer, and what the market is desperately calling for. And that's a very, very hard problem to solve, at least by my estimation, unless technology starts to take its place. And we start to leverage technology in a contextually sensitive way that allows us to deliver higher quality education to more learners with less people. We have to get that right. So for all of you who are in the room today, you couldn't be in a more important sector right now for the future of our continent. This youth bulge that we have on the continent is either going to be our greatest asset or it's going to be our greatest downfall. And education is the key to unlocking that human potential. And there's this old adage that talent is equally distributed and opportunity is not. And certainly one of my hopes for education technology is that we are able to create more opportunity through technology. So first of all, just a big thank you and congratulations for all of you for being here and for caring about education technology on the continent. That said, there's also some awesome opportunities, and impact at doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive. You can have incredible impact and you can do very financially well for yourself, for your shareholders, and for others. And there's often this, at least in my opinion, really unhelpful dialogue around the privatization of education, what that's going to mean for the future of it. We could sit and have a very long philosophical debate. The state sector is not incumbent anyway in delivering quality education. They're not. So I think it's time for private education to take its role in South Africa, and that's at every phase of education. And tech and private education means that you can attract capital, and means that you can attract the very best talent, and that you can do something really special on the continent. And again, the opportunity and the need is immense. All right, so jumping back to 2006, we started this business called Get Smarter, which is an online short course business servicing working professionals now from all around the world. In 2006, we started with the University of Cape Town delivering short courses with the law faculty. Now, back then, e-learning was this kind of dirty word. It was like you went in to talk about, like, let's do some cool e-learning, and Chris Hosken joined me on the journey at Get Smarter, as did Meg. Where's Meg? There we go. And, you know, back then it was just like, faculty would look at you and just be like, what? Like, e-learning, are you nuts? And I think this is the first thing that I want to say, is that any truly progressive thing that you're going to do, you're going to get a lot of resistance to start with. And the persistence is such a core element of what makes, what's ultimately allow you to realize any potential in education technology. But we had a very progressive faculty member, her name was Irena Vassafal, who ultimately gave us a chance, and thankfully she did. Now, a couple of dynamics that were really important there. We, as the private sector partner, approached the university and said, we will take all of the capital risk. We will complete the majority of the operations that are required to deliver these services, and we'll share in the revenue we will share with you. Now, there was meaningful inclusion of their faculty, there was full quality assurance, this was meaningful integration, but you've got to remember, at least with these academic partners, that they're already stretched to capacity. Things aren't exactly easy and cruisy in university environments or school environments or any education environments. So part of your job is making life easier for these individuals and trying to do as much of the heavy lifting as possible. And again, I believe that this is one of the value propositions that the private sector has to provide, where there's an intersection between private and public. So our value proposition is we'll do the vast majority of the work, we'll provide the capital, and this is upside potential for you and this opportunity to impact a new market that you may not have had access to before. And thankfully that went very well. That business grew from the law faculty to the commerce faculty to humanities, and ultimately we worked with every faculty at the university. Now, in 2013, late 2013, early 2014, we did something at the time that was quite interesting, is that we took master's degrees and postgraduate diplomas online. Now, we actually had quite a tough time with that, because ultimately we ran into some political issues with the Department of Higher Education and the Council for Higher Education, and truly that's another heads up in terms of the African education ecosystem. Like, politics are real, and not always are the best interests of the learners ultimately in mind. There's also some strong kind of domain territorialism and so on. So we actually ran into some pretty tough problems there, and that we always thought, okay, we're going to do these short courses, we'll grow into master's degrees, and ultimately that's how we'll grow an interesting business. That experience with our master's degrees scared the living daylights out of us. And we lost a heck of a lot of money at the time. Had to do everything possible just to pay salaries and so on. But thankfully, ultimately made it through that period. But then we kind of needed to change our thinking about what's the future, like how can we build this business and continue to grow if we're not going to be doing just short courses in South Africa, and we're certainly not going to be doing master's degrees and so on. And at that point, we realized that what we were doing in South Africa was actually quite special on a global stage. And so we started with this outreach, and Chris joined me for a lot of those initial outreach, meeting with top faculty from universities all around the world. And ultimately, we got our first big opportunity with MIT. And I think what was interesting about that MIT experience is that it transformed our business overnight. 2,900 learners paying $2,300 each from 130 countries around the world. Like, you can't believe how quickly you have to transform your entire business. You're doing extended working hours, you're servicing learners from all around the world, you're trying to figure out payment mechanisms for students from different countries, student support from students in different time zones. Like, wow, it was just wild. But the principle I want to share with you with that is, not only was it incredibly hard, but us as South Africans, we underestimate our potential to have global impact from South Africa. And this is something that, if nothing else that you take away from today, yes, it's about EdTech, and yes, it's about the continent, and I would argue there's the opportunity to have impact beyond the continent, leveraging South African capabilities, South African labor prices, South African time zone advantage. We have this incredible culture in South Africa where people just warm to us. Like, I was really worried at the first MIT course, thinking like, are people going to think they're being outsourced to them in like back office in Africa? Well, how are they going to feel about that? You've got these kind of like New York businessmen that were signing up for this fintech courses with MIT. They loved it. Why? Because South Africans are awesome. And really, really, we have the opportunity to think differently about how we leverage the skills that we've got and the capability that we've got to service a global audience, with South Africa actually being a competitive advantage. And that business then continued to go from strength to strength. We partnered with Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, MIT, Stanford, and truly the world's leading global universities, and ultimately we sold to a NASDAQ-listed business in 2017. There's a lot of opportunity for South African EdTech, not only to impact on the continent, but beyond. The other business I've been very involved in over the years is a business called Hubble Studios. We originally started that business as out of Get Smarter, servicing corporate clients on a fee-for-service basis. So it's an agency. We were providing services. We had an increasing number of corporates coming to us and saying, can you build an online campus? Can you build us a learning analytics engine? Can you build us a master's program? Whatever the case may be. And they didn't want to partner, but they wanted to pay us for our services. And so we did that. That business has grown reasonably well over the years. It is a lot of what it does is it takes advantage of the same fundamental dynamics that Get Smarter had. We've got a South African workforce that is servicing increasingly international audience. You've got this immediate price advantage. Fee-for-service businesses are hard, is one thing I'd say. And it's not that there's not a need for them, but I would say that ultimately choosing whether you do a fee-service business or a product-based business are two very, very different decisions. And ultimately, I would share with you that delivering a product is infinitely better from a business perspective, and ultimately, if you can find product market fit from a financial perspective as well. And so that business has done reasonably well in terms of fee-for-service businesses. We've got about 200,000 students that are currently under management with the business. And yeah, I mean, it's a reasonably interesting business. What I'm most excited about right now is what I'm doing at my latest venture, which is called the Valenture Institute. And the Valenture Institute, like any other kind of, I'm sure there's many EdTech startups in the room, you start with one idea in mind, and you just pivot until you eventually find your way. And what we started with was the idea that we wanted a high-fee paying online school that was cross-subsidizing no-fee learners in what are called blended learning micro-schools. Now, again, I started with some of the stats about education in South Africa and Africa, and these stats really, really concern me, like big time. And my initial thinking was, okay, so what if we can kind of create another Robin Hood kind of environment? We'll keep our cost base in South Africa, we'll increasingly service a global audience, and we'll use their dollars and pounds and so on, and we'll cross-subsidize students in no-fee blended learning schools. Now, maybe a quick side note. Education technology has radical transformative purposes, but you need the bloody internet in order to get there. and you need a computer, and you need a safe and conducive learning environment. And I think what's often underappreciated about the role that schools play in a continent like Africa is that they actually provide a safe harbor from the very harsh realities of home, particularly for the most vulnerable. So the idea that it's just about every kid's going to have a mobile phone, they're going to be able to magically learn if they like wrong, bloody wrong. It doesn't work like that. Learning is about first and foremost, a sense of safety, a sense of belonging. Once you can create that sense of safety and belonging, from there you can start to create the opportunities for learners to take intellectual leaps and start to be pushed into their zone of proximal development and so on. But there's preconditions there that need to be met in order to create conducive learning environments. And so for me, the thing I've been obsessed about over the years is how can we leverage the best of technology and still think about the sort of physical infrastructure that's required. But do we need to build schools in order to do that? Now, quick side note, we spend between 120 and 160 million rand on average to build every new school in South Africa. They can only ever service a maximum of 1,000 students. It's patently insane to keep building new schools. The alternative, like we started our first micro school in Mitchell's Plain, is that we took a storeroom in Mitchell's Plain and we repurposed it into a thriving digital co-learning space. And the concept is quite simple. All teaching and learning takes place online. You're getting all the efficiencies of education technology, as well as a distributed teacher base. Now that's a big one as well, because the best teachers don't live and work in the hardest areas. And we need to find new bridges to get high quality teachers to be able to engage with learners regardless of where they're geographically located. But again, do we need to build schools for that? My view is certainly not. And then what we did basically is you have what looks very much like a co-working space, and you have a member from the community. We call these individuals mentors, who are mothers of the community, who are from that community, who look like our students, who sound like our students, who can relate to the context that our students find themselves in. They're not meant to be teachers. Their sole role is pastoral care for the learners. And this combination has been academically unbelievably successful. Like we've seen our learners jump on average 3 grade levels in a year last year. And it's possible. It can be done. We just need to think differently about what this thing is that we call schooling. And Keelan and his company, Reflective Learning, have played a very big role in that, particularly in mathematics and English. It's like that is a product to watch in no uncertain terms. So we started with this idea, let's get high fee paying online learners, and we recruit them from all around the world, and they'll be on an international curriculum. It's going to be amazing, and we'll charge them like $5,000 to $8,000, and then we'll cross subsidize on no fee learners in a micro school. Couple of learnings. First of all, it's really difficult to get sufficient mass in the high fee paying learners in online in order to cross subsidize learners in the no fee space. Like if impact is our objective, we weren't getting there nearly fast enough. So we've done, since we started in September 2019, then we can all cast our minds forward kind of 6 months after that, March 2020, COVID hits, and it's like, okay, like let it rain, students, now we're going to have massive impact. Trickled in, maybe an extra 10% lift on student numbers. Like it was quite a disconcerting time actually. And since then, guys, like we have pivoted 11 times. 11 times with new products, with new services, trying something else, and every single time you learn a little something else, you pivot a bit more, you get closer to fulfilling a real market need. And part of what I wanted to share that with you is that very seldomly when you start something in EdTech is it actually what you end up doing. You need to consistently focus on listening to your market and seeing what is it that people actually want. Because if you're still fighting for every single sale and it's blood, sweat and tears, something's amiss. There is desperate need, and the question is what is the best way to meet that need? And the culmination of that work has really been in our launch most recently of the UCT Online High School. As of this morning, we've had 8,280 students apply to join the school in January of next year. There is a huge need. This school is priced at 2,000 Rand a month, and what's absolutely blowing my mind is the way that the market is picking up with this new education technology provision, the way that they're thinking about constituting and creating the enabling environments. So I had a call with a mother in Valenture a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, Rob, like, I spend more than 2,000 Rand a month on transport to get my kid out of Valenture to send them to a school in town. It takes about an hour and a half each way, and it's actually really dangerous to get there. She's like, this is a no-brainer. What myself and 5 other mothers in the area have done, we've taken one shack, we've turned it into a co-learning center, and what we're doing is that, and we've pooled our resources for UPS, backup internet, et cetera, and the parents are taking on a rotational basis every single day of the week. One other parent sits in the room to provide that adult supervision. We've got a church in Northern Cape who's taken 200 seats that turned the whole church into a learning center. Why? Because the government isn't able to provide enough schools in the area. And there are hundreds of these sorts of stories. And I think what gets me so excited is the potential for EdTech to be unleashed into the ecosystem, and then just to watch how it gets creatively adopted. And I think there's this kind of somewhat patronizing Western mindset that I've had, like, no, I need to go set up the micro school and get that all sorted for them so that we can do it. It's like, no, you don't. Not necessarily. People know what they want, they know what they need, and if you can provide new technology opportunities, people will adopt it in ways that have certainly surprised me. So that's where we are at the moment. We're super excited about the future of Valenture. We are in advanced conversation with top UK and US universities to do the same, but all focused on emerging economies. And maybe this I want to again just pull out a couple of the kind of thematic points here. One thing I would say when we talk about education technology is that the closer you can move towards a full service solution where you are an end-to-end solution for your customer, the better. One of the things that I've seen in EdTech is that individual technology components that are introduced that are only part of the solution are actually very hard for users to adopt. So if you're only providing a small component of what a teacher actually needs to teach a subject or to teach their array of subjects, and it doesn't integrate with the systems that they've already got, and now they've got to do their department reporting over here, but then they've got this other dashboard over here, but it doesn't speak to this one. Like this kind of piecemeal EdTech is often very, very challenging. And it's not to say that it can't be done, but it can be very, very challenging. Comprehensive end-to-end solutions, at least in my experience and exposure, generally get more market adoption. And then the second thing I would encourage you to think about is just like really obsessing over your users. and trying to understand exactly who they are, what are their pain points, and if I'm reflective of the many mistakes that we've made at Valenture, one of them is I just didn't spend enough time. If I wanted the high fee paying learners to come to basically be fueling this business, I wasn't spending enough time with the parents that could potentially pay these fees. I've got a long laundry list now of learnings as to why this isn't going to work and why that ultimately wouldn't scale. But having not spent enough time and being humble enough to actually spend time with those users and with those parents up front, you miss some of the most critical insights. So team, I'm probably at about time. So I'm sorry, I would love to talk and engage and also do more kind of questions and answers if we can. I think there's then going to be a panel discussion now and maybe leave some time at the end for question and answers. Sound okay, Krista? Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for your time and energy. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rob, for that, for the insights, and also just from a personal experience, just bringing in that perspective is super useful. So I'm just gonna welcome our sort of panel on stage. So if you guys could just take a seat. But before, you guys can come in and take a seat. But before I just hand over to our panelist, Lwazi, I would like to give an intro for her, since she'll be sort of introducing us to all our speakers today. You can move to the side. So Lwazi is, no, don't worry, I won't embarrass you, hopefully. So Lwazi is an entrepreneur, an investor, passionate about sort of investing from a gender lens. And none of what I'm going to say here really fully encapsulates her ability and the work and the wealth of knowledge that she's coming into sort of this conversation with. But just briefly, she previously she was head of venture at Founders Factory, which is based in Johannesburg. But she is currently the founder and CEO of Her Quarters, spelled H, and then in brackets ER, and then another bracket Q, which is, she's pioneering sort of Africa's first social capital market for Pan-African women founders of color. So the first ever gender lens impact investing driver for women of color who are working in tech and so social entrepreneurship, which is really incredible and really amazing, and we're really honored to have you on the as our moderator for tonight. So she's also the chapter founder for Impact Investment Exchange, pioneering Africa's first women's livelihood income bonds, valuated around 10 million USD, fixed income security with a dual focus on social and financial returns, aimed at mobilizing private capital towards Pan-African female entrepreneurs, addressing one or more of the UN SDGs. I have to read this out because it's very hard to write. But without further ado, I'd let Lwazi give a proper introduction to herself in terms of who she is, and then also our incredible plan. So thank you.
Hi everyone, is this working?
Great.
Thank you for that, Tsepo. I think we've said enough about me, so I'm more excited about the amazing humans I get to chat to today and having you all here today. So welcome everyone. My name is Lwazi Wali, as Tsepo said. Just to give us a sense of context, we're obviously in the room and we're also virtual, so a bit of housekeeping if any cell phones are on, just to kind of get those off. With me today, we have the pleasure of having Zakheni Ngubo, who's the founder of, I guess, Kelo Digital Books and Syafunda, dual founder, yes. We've got Luke Mostert. Is it T silent or pronounced? Great. From 4DI Capital. And we've got Christopher Hosken, obviously from Startup School and with some history at with Rob as well. So excited to have you all, and thank you for being here today. Fantastic. So in terms of general structure, I think we have about 45 minutes, right? So we're going to spend about 30 minutes sort of panel discussion, learning more from you all in your founder journey, investor journey, and then also open it up for about 10 minutes of Q&A. Cool. So I think maybe to kick things off, I'll pass it over to each of you to maybe you can just introduce yourselves, share a bit more about who you are, what you do, your business, and sort of your journey in terms of managing sort of fundraising and impact as well. So just kick off with introductions. I would typically say ladies first, but you know, there we go. Sure.
Okay. So is this thing on? Okay, yeah. Cool. Hi everyone. My name is Zakheni, and I'm the founder of Syafunda. So I think I'd just like to just give you a bit of an intro as to how I ended up in this space in the first place. So I'm originally from a township called Lwazi. So during my last 2 years of high school, we didn't have a maths teacher. And so I completed matric with 4 distinctions and I failed maths dismally. I got like 23%. So after that, obviously I couldn't get into any university that I had applied for. So it was a really tough period. All your friends, people you know are going off and you have no idea what to do next. And it was a really critical point in my life because there was a lot of pressure to go and join SAPS from family and everyone. I instead went into a finishing school where for the first time I could actually, I was working part-time so I could buy a book, I could have access to a teacher. And through that, I was able to, pass maths with a B and, I ended up at UCT. So that whole process, I guess, is what inspired the idea of trying to say, how do we lower the barriers in education by using technology? So taking the best teachers who are teaching in rural schools, who speak the language, and creating video content that is more relevant contextually for those learners. And so that's essentially how we started. We partnered with the best teachers in KZN to develop content for maths and science in isiZulu. So we obviously had a lot of pushback at that time. Now it's actually quite normal, but we were one of the first people to push for that. And so we went from there, we developed the content, and then the issue became distribution. So we'd go into schools, set up screens, and the kids loved the content. But when you look at our analytics, they go once and then they never come back again. So when we went back, and we started trying to find out what is the reason, and they didn't like us very much. I remember one kid said, "No, I'm not going to do this thing. You finish my data." So, so I think we, as much as we knew exactly what we wanted to do, what we failed to understand was that we were building this amazing product for the market that we wanted, without really understanding the market that we actually had, which was learners who are buying 30 Rand airtime, were using feature phones. And so, you have these amazing solutions, but when you don't actually get in touch with that market, it becomes an issue. So I think from then we said, okay, let's pivot. How do we, innovate in this space of connectivity? So we ended up developing the Syafunda digital libraries, which was this boxes that we've deployed in schools. We've worked with reflexive learning to also run, baseline tests in some of the most rural schools like Ngandla, Ngubo, where there's no connectivity. And these boxes allow for content distribution and data collection, basically without any infrastructure. And so, it's just been one process after another. So from that space, we started obviously with the data that we're getting. We thought, we're able to see students doing well. How do we identify them for potential bursaries? And that led also to the development of Kelo. So, because we're distributing all this content, which is open source, but what kids need are books, and they're quite expensive. And you go to bookstores and libraries at Adams and all these other places in the beginning of the year, and there's not enough. So we then developed a platform called Kelo, which is essentially a digital bookstore. So it allows for people to, instead of buying and owning a book, as an addition, they can buy a 12-month license at a much cheaper rate, right? And it's sort of like this 5-in-1 platform where, we've got a built-in wallet, a community within this space. And it's really just been about us learning how to be in this space and then growing with it and changing where we needed to and adapting. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's me.
Thank you. Chris?
I'm Chris. Is this on? I'll just use your thanks. I'm Chris. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm a co-founder of Startup School. The reason why we started Startup School is really quite simple. Unemployment is a huge issue in South Africa, probably one of the biggest social problems we have in the country. And we believe that by creating high growth entrepreneurs who rapidly add jobs, who rapidly add economic opportunity, we can go a long way to addressing unemployment as an issue. So we also in South Africa have one of the biggest small business failure rates in the world. And we researched why entrepreneurs are failing and what are the biggest reasons for these failures. And in our research, we realized that you've got to take an ecosystem approach and have support that surrounds the entrepreneur at every stage of the journey. And that's very necessary for most emerging markets, but we're a little bit behind in South Africa. And we're trying to get that to catch up. So we've created a fully digital ecosystem of support for entrepreneurs, backed by our great partner Investec. And we're really trying to, we've had 2,000 businesses through the platform. And we're really trying to scale that out across the continent and ensure that we have entrepreneurs rapidly creating more jobs, because in South Africa there's an obsession with skills development, and which is super important, but skills development without jobs on the other side of the equation is not very good. It's still good, but it's subpar, because you need to get entrepreneurs creating jobs, collaborating with each other, and that's what we're really trying to drive into the economy. So it's very exciting getting to work with tons of different types of entrepreneurs. At the center of our ecosystem is an EdTech, I suppose that's why I'm here today, intervention, a 12-week online course that the entrepreneurs go through. And at the end of that course, they can pitch for micro grants, which we're seeing a lot of success with, which is not debt or equity funding, because I think South Africa has a really interesting opportunity to create mixed models of funding for entrepreneurs, which hopefully we'll get into a bit more later, and to really help foster this entrepreneurial culture. There's a lot of cool pockets of entrepreneurship, especially in Cape Town, in Johannesburg, but really we haven't seen this big wave of where people really want to be entrepreneurs and really take it seriously. Some people do it for a season and then they go back into the workforce because kind of the challenges and the red tape are just so high, and we really need to address that. So that's what we're trying to do. There's a big advocacy part in what we're doing. The more entrepreneurs we can get doing cool stuff, the more we can show public sector, the more we can get interesting private partnerships going. And yeah, that's what we're trying to do with Startup School. Before that, I had the privilege of working with that handsome devil Rob at Get Smarter and doing some cool stuff there. And yeah, I'm super interested. Why? Because the barriers to, you obviously need awesome people like Rob and maybe myself and Megs to run companies like that. But in South Africa, I haven't seen a really good competitor for Get Smart yet. I don't know if you've seen one, Rob, but there has been a few, but I'm just blown away even after the exit that there isn't more people trying to get into that exact space. And maybe because there's quite a few hurdles once you get going. But I just feel like the value chain has just been so blown up that there's so many interesting pockets to work in. And I think EdTech's going to be a very exciting space. So excited to be here.
Hi guys, I'm Luke. My background in education started about 7 years ago. I was in high school, towards the end of my high school career, and realized that the opportunities I'd been given to attend quality high schools were, vastly different to those around the country. So, being quite naive at the time, I thought, well, let me try identify some kids that are quite talented and would do well in a school like mine, and find some scholarships to support them. So I did this and brought on about five kids in high school. And I quickly learned that the biggest issue now I faced was that they'd come from a really poor school, now to adapt to a school that most kids had their whole lives to kind of build up to in terms of mentors, parents, colleagues, family members that could kind of help them along the journey. So the next step was to link them with mentors and tutors from places like UCT that had a similar passions to them, like say the one child wanted to be an engineer, would link him with an engineer from UCT. And this all worked quite well, and the kids became really successful in their schools, and many got into universities and went on. But from there, I quickly realized the biggest issue, as Rob pointed out in his speech, was how do you scale this? And that's where tech comes in. So during my university years, I got an opportunity to intern at a venture capital firm in Nigeria, and I worked with some edtechs over there, and that kind of ignited my passion for the industry. And bringing that back to South Africa, I got an opportunity to work in tech at a VC firm in Cape Town, and that's really fostered my belief that education technology is the only way we're going to be able to scale education equity globally.
Great, thank you all so much. Really interesting, backgrounds, and I love the fact that coming through in all your stories is how your sense of passion and purpose and a really strong problem that sort of prompted your decision to choose the business that you're in. So to kind of just sort of frame the discussion today, right, the problem we're really trying to unpack is really this notion around what's been called, the EdTech founders conundrum. But, coming from a venture background myself, it's typically any founders conundrum, right? Especially one that is operating in Africa, where depending on how you actually define impact, it's very hard to not impact, right? And so we're really trying to unpack through your expertise, your journey in terms of how you all, how do we balance this idea of sort of, social impact as well as commercial returns. And I'm aligned with Rob in the thinking that, there has to be a place where social return and returns are not mutually exclusive, right? And so in touching on education, the general perspective is that education is highly regulated. It's too specialized in terms of, South African education versus Nigerian or versus American, and which generally then makes it really hard to monetize that. It makes it really hard to scale that, and consequently really tricky to fund or even attract capital. So I'm really excited to have you guys on the panel, because I think you all represent really interesting parts of that value chain, right? And that sort of trifecta. We've got, founders on the one side. We've got the typical culprit, which is the investor, which we're going to be, putting some highlights on your end. So really keen to get from each of you, your journey specifically within the founder side, to share a little bit around your funding journey. I know, just having spoken to you all earlier, you've explored a variety of different financial instruments to get you to where you are, ranging from grants to partnerships to just raising capital. So keen to get your journey in terms of your fundraising journey, because that's typically the hardest. And then from an investor side, especially with yourself coming from a traditional VC, I'm keen to get a sense of how you all evaluate and think about investing in businesses around impact. How do you, define impact, especially given, some of it requires a sort of patient capital lens. So just keen to get a sense from you all in terms of your founder's journey and how you as an investor think of it to start. Go in the same order.
Okay, cool. So I would say on the funding aspect, the biggest issue that, especially when we were starting out, and then a lot of entrepreneurs within this space in South Africa face, is that a lot of people who go into this space initially just wanting to solve a problem. They're not necessarily thinking about exiting or structures or compliance or due diligence. They just have a really amazing idea that they think will make a difference, and so they go hard at work in terms of building that solution. So the problem comes when you actually are able to scrape off whatever you needed to build a solution, and then it actually works, because now you need the money to build and scale that. The problem is you have no documentation, you have no structures that are actually needed by the investors to be able to secure that money. So a lot of entrepreneurs find themselves in sort of this middle ground where they're stuck because they don't have the systems that are required by the investors to be able to secure the funding, even though they have a product that they can show that it's working. And a group of the investors that we have in South Africa is too small, the pool, in terms of being able to actually take that risk and accept that, without the documentation, without the history, without the security, we're going to let these people explore. We're going to give them the support to be able to do it. So that's one of the biggest issues that we're facing, is that we have a lot of really amazing ideas and a lot of people doing things in very small pockets because they are just stretching the little that they have. And in order for them to be able to prove what they're doing. But then for them to get to that point into the next step, they don't necessarily have that middle ground process of now having firstly the money to be able to build in, the due diligence structures, the corporate governance structures, the finance structures that will attract an investor. They don't have neither the money nor the expertise to be able to get to that point, but they can't get the money to be able to get there. So that becomes sort of like a no man's land where everyone sort of gets stuck in.
Chris?
We've got a slightly different story because we actually started Startup School with purely social intentions. So when we obviously saw there was a big need for what we were doing, but we didn't really feel right because we knew we were going to have the most impacts, and we didn't really feel right charging high course fees. So we were lucky enough to get a corporate partner, which really helped and really made us, gave us the ability to keep it really inclusive. And to this day, we've been able to keep that golden thread throughout the growth story. And even though we've been approached by investors because we've got a pretty cool model, it's all digital. We're busy scaling into Africa now, and the investment case is really solid. But we know, we'll hear from the investor just now, we know what investors mainly want for the most part, and it is going to sometimes taint your model, especially if you take investments at the wrong time, before you've actually solved some of your social goals. So we're hoping one day you read about an interesting case study where they did it the other way, where you went strictly social and then there was commercial success to come and host that.
We look forward to seeing you do that. It's amazing.
So in terms of the investor perspective, it's an interesting one. I think that at the end of the day, what a lot of startups probably forget is that as venture capital funds or impact funds, we also have investors into us. So in a venture capital landscape, that might be, corporate companies, private equity firms, and from an impact perspective, that might be, developmental DFIs, like global kind of institutions that are looking to make an impact through funds. And these firms require metrics from us. So every single startup we invest in, we have to report back to on a quarterly basis and explain, how we're doing, and whether it's an impact side, it might be, how many lives are they changing? From a commercial side, like where I work, it's, what is the bottom line? What's the revenue? Are they growing? So everyone, kind of has the wolf at the door, not just the startups, but also the investors. So then I guess in terms of EdTech, what does that lead to? What leads to investors that are, very scared to get involved in industries they don't understand? If you look at the global venture capital landscape from the beginning, it obviously started in kind of Silicon Valley and Israel, and VCs chose the easiest industries to invest in that they could, plausibly get a return, and that was fintech. Payments, lots of money in that, kind of the boom, dot-com boom. So the biggest exits inevitably came from fintechs, and over the years, lots of fintechs, PayPal, Venmo, all of those companies, Square, have gone and become unicorns, and eventually VCs still will now want to continue investing in EdTechs. in fintech, sorry. So what's happened over the last couple of years is that those industries have become really saturated, and this is where I think EdTech can now, and other industries can now benefit from this, is that investors are finally seeing that, okay, there is money in other industries, and that these are actually the sectors where we can get most of our returns because they're not saturated. I think it's actually remarkable, the Get Smarter story, because it's probably still one of the biggest exits on the African continent, and yet it occurred at such an early stage in the venture capital landscape. And US firms and local firms are now starting to realize that EdTech's kind of the next frontier and can kind of grow and achieve those returns.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And I think what's really interesting to me around all the responses is you're touching, some of the core issues right at the center of this conundrum, which is between sort of impact and financial return, right? So to achieve that impact, right, there's a certain level of, I guess, business model design. I think Rob touched on that as well. That really informs, one, how well you're just successful at getting the business off the ground, scaling it, but equally how you're able to then attract capital, right, outside of maybe grant and maybe impact or patient capital. So I'm keen to get a sense from you guys, like what are some of the most exciting sort of EdTech business models, designs that you've seen both on the continent, globally, that you think are really strong, that you would either maybe looking to impose into your own businesses? Just what sort of edtech models are you seeing across the continent that you think these are exciting and these are scalable and hopefully will attract VC and other types of funding? Anyone?
At the risk of being biased,
pardon?
I would. So I think, at the risk of being biased, I'd rather. I would say, from what I've seen, just in terms of also my own experience, I'm just going to speak in general instead of naming a particular company. But the companies that I've seen actually grow and scale are ones that look at actually serving the consumer or the user directly. Right.
Like B2C.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So because, and we've also done this a lot. I mean, when we first started, we were dealing with schools. So obviously the schools we're dealing with cannot afford to pay for the system. So a lot of the work that we were trying to do for schools that by September, they're out of electricity, So then how do you go into that space and then say, we need you guys to pay for this system? So a lot of the work that we were doing is in the background, going and raising funds, either through CSI or through other institutions. And what you find there is that, there is CSI and all these other funding models is more about fashion. Whatever is hot during that particular time will get the money. And also it's not very sustainable. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time to bring in a client. And whether you meet the targets and you do the work or not, change of management means change of direction, then boom, you have to start over again. So I think when it comes to, there's a lot of companies who are active and who are sustaining themselves because currently their model is working. But when you're looking at sustainability in the long term, I think what I've seen, things that seem to, be able to sustain, especially what we've seen with the economic crisis, are companies that find a way to take that and expand further and say, how do we work directly with the consumer and how do we get somebody to actually pay and be the customer and have a more closer relationship with that person rather than going through either a school or a government or, yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to probe you a little bit further on that, just because, traditional thinking would assume a B2C model, especially even an impact, is a lot harder to scale and is a lot more expensive to acquire users or customers. And then also, given the end user is limited in terms of the ability to pay for the service, would you recommend that as a route to market, or do you think the more B2B or maybe even B2C could be a stronger model for people to explore in terms of just being able to, acquire users, but also monetize, right, so that you can become sustainable? You're right. It is costly, and because also you're not just dealing with one aspect. The lower you go in the pyramid, you're not just dealing with people buying that particular item, but it's a combination of a whole lot of other different things that you have to consider. But if you, I think, structure your product and your offering in the right way. So, for instance, when we've, as much as a lot of the work we were doing, we were getting our products funded by sponsors. When we did the math, we found that we can actually, if just every child pay R1 a month, we could be able to sustain our platform, right? So even though we would raise funds to do the upfront investment, how do you then continue to sustain it without it, causing too much of a stretch on the people on the ground? But also, when you look at your model, obviously as you are working, you're adding value. You're collecting data, you are doing research. So how do you then take that output and find a way to commercialize it? Yeah. And so, and that's one of the things for us that's led to thinking, we're distributing free content, but we could use the same platform, the same infrastructure, the same networks to sell books at a cheaper rate. Yeah. Right? We could use the same data, the same system to identify students who qualify for BCom bursaries for ISFAP and for other people. So through that value creation process, you start thinking creatively about sort of chipping away at the costs and the block and then reducing the... It means it's a lot more work, obviously, but and it takes time to build all of that because initially you have to sort of build that in and build that value to be able to commercialize it. But I think that's the kind of thinking we need to be going into. Is yes, we're getting these big contracts with the government or whatever, but it's so fickle because in the
overnight, whatever happens, you could lose your business.
Yeah.
So if it's about sustainability, even if you start there should always be that mindset to say, how do I then transition from this sort of like having 1 or 3 big customers to actually looking at increasing those numbers to smaller.
Thank you. So there's something there around exploring sort of blended finance, grants, sponsorships, money that you raise, but also being creative.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank
so
you.
once you get that money, how do you use it to build something sustainable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, Mike, what's exciting you in the edtech space? What models do you think work?
There's a company that I have quite a big crush on that I always follow. I have a small crush on Rob, but no. The company's called Byju's out of India. If you want to see unhinged growth in head tech and just absolute crazy scale, look at Byju's. They've done amazingly. Started with a simple idea of just writing on a board with the best teachers, filming courses, and they've got deals now with Disney, Amazon, and they're able, because of that big scale that they have, they're able to reach really underserved people in the Indian market, and they're able to offer to keep their fees really affordable, relatively affordable. And it's just a really cool case to see how EdTech how plugging certain technologies into certain problems can lead to some really cool stuff. But we often learn more from the mistakes people make in EdTech, and I feel like everyone kind of hides their mistakes in the industry, maybe because it is so nascent and new. But there's a really good book called Class Clowns, and it's about how much money got wasted in EdTech in America, investor money, and all these class clowns are these cases of EdTech startups and businesses that kind of go under, and it's really interesting. The lessons are really cool. And just subscribe to EdSurge. Every single week there's new EdTech companies in there that are doing cool stuff internationally. It's mainly American market. But my biggest crush in EdTech at the moment is a company out of Durban. I'm a proud South African, and I'm actually a Durbanite living here in Cape Town. They're called Advantage Learn. They do maths online, they do NBT prep, they do a whole bunch of other cool stuff. And they've got really solid investor relations, they've got a really solid team, they've got a really solid vision of what they want to do. And they've managed to take the technology that they're using and reach into more underserved areas through their foundation, through corporate partnerships, through taking what they're already doing and taking the best of that and putting the contextual relevance in and serving a market that sometimes other people are too scared to serve. So they're really cool guys to look out for.
Very interesting. Luke, I'll get your opinion, but also keen to get your sense of, do you think, it's just EdTech is too nascent and it's still too early, and it's just not attractive in terms of investability, or what are your takes? Like what business models are exciting you, and what do you think the future is in terms of scalability for EdTech and investment flow?
In terms of, firstly, globally, I don't think EdTech is at all too nascent. I think it's really taking off. I read a statistic maybe a year ago that in 2019, funding into EdTech grew 100% year on year. I mean, that's a remarkable growth. It's more than any other industry that I was looking at the time. A great model that I have a crush on is a company called Lambda School out of the US. And what Lambda School does is that they compress a 4-year or 5-year computer science degree into 1 year. And these degrees, it sounds pretty naive, but it's revolutionized the industry so much that companies like Google and Facebook are employing more people from Lambda School than they are schools like Harvard, Stanford, and all the top institutions. And the best part about it is the people that do the year program, they don't pay for it. Well, at least up front. But they use a model called an income share agreement approach, otherwise short called an ISA, which effectively allows the people to study for a year, and that they only start paying when they get a job. So Lambda School becomes so confident that their students are going to get a job that they're willing to sacrifice all that income up front in exchange for a truly valuable education.
Nice. No, I'm a big fan of them as well, and it's a lovely example of sort of really strong human-centered design, as well as sort of financial incentive structuring, right, where you know that you can get that money back in the future. Well, thank you guys. No, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think that this income share agreement model in a couple of years will be huge in Africa. A startup that came out of Ingenie, I think it was cohort 3 or 4, called Zio, that I work with, is also trying to kind of use the Lambda model in coding in Africa. And I believe that an income share agreement model, once it becomes a little bit more mainstream here, could make a lot of impact.
Yeah, I mean, we just look at models like Ndala, which is, some sort of blended version of that, and they've managed to scale and raise a lot. I'm just conscious of time, and I do want the audience to participate, because this was not designed to be an analogous conversation. So we have about, how many, 7 minutes? 10 minutes? Okay, great. So I'd love to open it up to the audience to take questions for both the panelists and Rob, see if you guys have any questions, thoughts, comments. It's almost Friday. We can hang in there. Cool. Yes. I don't know. Do we need to?
Can I just take
notes? Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Please say your name and thank you. Great.
Hi, I'm Brendan Hughes. I'm on the board of directors of Ingenie. One of the issues that I think we face with EdTech and startups is everybody working at quite a small scale. And Rob's touched on this point, some of our panelists have touched on this point. I wanted to ask the question about whether startups are thinking about mergers as an opportunity to achieve scale. That's a different path from raising investment into a small business and trying to maybe grow it through burning through some capital to get to that scale. And what maybe the sort of psychological barriers are amongst founders to really thinking about mergers as an opportunity to achieve scale at an early stage and then maybe raise investment once that scale's been achieved.
You want to take it?
Thank you. I'll sit down here. Brendan, such a good question. I don't pretend to know the answer definitively, but a view is that founders are often unemployable. And I mean that because once you start your own business and you get a taste of the creative agency that you have to kind of forge your path, as hard as it is, it's also incredibly rewarding. And an investor said to me a while ago, there's no such thing as a merger, there's only acquisitions. Like someone ultimately is taking control of another company. And I think that's, if I were to think out loud about why there's probably less of that happening, is that for a lot of founders, unless there's a big exit that's related with you being acquired, the prospect of not being able to be in control of your creative destiny is not super appealing. That's a view, but certainly not a definitive one.
Yeah, just to add on that as well, I would say that also I think at that time when you're starting out, as much as you are exercising and you are implementing at a small scale, you're also learning. And a lot of what you're doing is trial and error, and there's a lot of movement and innovation. So when you start bringing in, another partner, there's a whole lot of things that you have to consider, the culture, the direction. And obviously when there's a lot of changes in the process, and then you bring in other people, it does create complexities. And so that could potentially be one of the reasons. And I would agree with you. I think there's very little coordination in terms of looking at the overall community. I think possibly maybe that's where we can start to be able to sort of build that trust so that people can sort of start, working together in small scales, not necessarily within their business. But if, for instance, I think, the whole EdTech community decided that, okay, we know what the major problems are that are stopping all of us from achieving scale. Data and devices, right? Why don't we just designate one device as like this school device, or develop one together and collectively put money towards that, or create something that way we can actively be able to look at the wider environmental aspects that touch us, as a collective, and start there. Because I think at that small scale, it's messy just when you are as a startup on your own and then an investor comes in. Now imagine a whole other company, a whole new people, culture, and everyone is just moving at so many different directions. It's a good place to innovate and get creative, but as soon as then you start to formalize things, it becomes a little bit harder. So I think that's possibly the reason. It's too early, and we don't have the structures and the consistency yet, and we're still just figuring this out. So we need to first get to a point where we even know where we're doing before we can bring in other people.
Great. Thank you, guys. I see another question in the.
Hi, my name is Evan. So I wanted to ask a question. I think to Rob, you were talking about how at some point you wanted to focus on the premium markets, and you felt that's one of the things that you didn't do is to engage with the, you can call them the clients, which are the parents of the kids. So how did you end up overcoming that? Like how do you actually engage them, or where do you find them? So that's my question.
Certainly. And I think part of the reason for sharing that story is because I actually up front didn't spend enough time with the intended target audience that was likely to pay for the service, and didn't spend enough time understanding what are their pain points and why would, and is online even a suitable solution for them. And the short answer is that in a country like South Africa, but this is indeed true around the world, school once you're in is a very sticky value proposition. And particularly for parents of the kind of higher socioeconomic bracket, they have the luxury of choice. They're able to move into the right suburbs from an early stage in their child's development, get them into the right junior schools with throughput, into the right high school with the best opportunity to get into the right university. And once you're in, it takes pretty exceptional circumstances to pull them out of that school. And this is in the case of high functioning schools, right? Where teachers are actually arriving, and where you don't have a math teacher who's not there for the last 2 years of your schooling. Like when there's all these peripheral factors that in reasonably high functioning schooling, that unless there's something terribly broken, like parents aren't that keen to move away from it. So we just found that the use cases for moving to online for that high fee paying demographic were actually incredibly slim. Contrast that with parents in the aspirational portion of the market that is looking to improve their prospects, where the only option they've ever had is public schools that are on the ground, where unfortunately a lot of our public schools are not doing particularly well. And then when you introduce a aspirational alternative with a brand that is appealing at a price point that's actually accessible, you start to see a very, very different dynamic play out. So coming back to your question, I actually didn't spend enough time up front with those parents to learn those lessons, and then only through trying to sell to them did I start to uncover the lessons and the insights. And I'd like to say that I'll never make that mistake again, but like I probably will. and it's like that's another thing as an entrepreneur. It doesn't matter how many times you do this stuff. You're going to make 10,000 mistakes, like again and again and again. And the only real question is, how quickly are you going to respond to those mistakes? How stubbornly are you going to hold to your original idea? And that's often where businesses flounder. And like I feel like the MO of any startup is get to product market fit, don't run out of cash. Like do those two things, and you can build something interesting.
Basically Nirvana. Great.
So there's 2 questions from online.
Great. Okay.
So we're streaming live on YouTube. So the first question is for Zakheni, and that's from. So for Zakheni, my dad was from Lwazi, and then they asked which section. They asked you which section are you from, but the question is, your story is inspiring. Where did you find the inspiration to push forward and create Syafunda, especially when you consider sort of the barriers that currently exist growing up in a space like Lwazi? What are the things? What are the things that motivated you and sort of kept you going?
Okay. Yeah, so the question is J section. And I went to Zulubanzi High School, so they would know what I'm talking about. So I think for me, it was really about exposure. There was, I was doing terribly badly throughout my high school and primary school. I remember when I was in grade 10, my June results came out and I was positioned 37 out of about 40 kids in the class. And I was fortunate enough, or lucky enough, to have a best friend who came from a slightly well-off family, and they were actually coming here to Cape Town for the June holidays. And because I was so close to their child, then they decided to take me along. It was, for me, the first time I'd been on a plane, been on a cab, just yeah, it was a surreal experience, you know, going through that whole process. So for me at that time, when I came back home after that weekend, I decided that I'm going back to Cape Town. I didn't know for what, I didn't know what I was going to study, but I wanted to go to UCT. And from that point on, I knew that the only school in Lwazi that had a direct relationship with UCT was a school that I wasn't in, which was Zwelibanzi, right? And what I decided to do is change schools. But in order to do that, I had to perform so I could get a transfer. So I worked incredibly hard that from June, from position 37, in September I was position 1. And then in December I was position 1 again. And then I took that report. And transferred. And, you know, the other school, you know, you had to be in at 6:30 until 6. There was corporal punishment. There was a lot of things that deterred a lot of people from going there. But yeah, that's where I went, and that was my vision. I just wanted to go back to Cape Town. I had no idea what I wanted to study, and I kind of figured all that along the way. So even when I had completed my matric in that school that was supposed to get me to UCT, and I didn't have a maths teacher, you know, that vision for me was still, you know, the thing that kept me going, to say, rather than, you know, give up on that and go into the SAPS, go and, you know, into a finishing school, which meant that I had to wear black and white and attend after hours, right, in order for me to eventually get to UCT. So I think exposure and having sort of that, we underestimate, you know, the importance of showing someone a different reality. And for me, I got a snapshot of that, and I said, I'm hanging on to this. This is going to be my life. And yeah, now, I mean, I came from Joburg, so
You're in Cape
I do
Town
that
again.
often now, right?
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. I think this is last question from online, and we're going to take 2 more questions from the audience. This is an interesting one because it's not to the panelist, but to our moderator, Lwazi. So the question is, it would be no lie to say that EdTech space is an extremely male-dominated industry. How have you navigated the parts of legitimacy as an organization that specifically focuses on women of color?
It's a great question. So I don't have a lot of context in terms of EdTech, but what I will talk to is just generally, right, as a woman of color, in terms of founders and just female founders, right, irregardless of color. And just to give a bit of, you know, context in terms of just the size of the problem, right? When you consider how critical funding is, I think everybody has touched at the, you know, the level of that, and how much that determines how fast you scale and how fast you sort of ingrain your point of view, right? Which in my opinion is what startups do. You know, when you consider just last year in 2020, over $300 billion raised in venture capital globally, about 2% of that went to female founders, and that's white, Asian, all across. About 0.02% of that went to female founders of color, which then just gives you the scale of the problem and the scale of the discrepancy, right? And so I think for me, what we're focused on is really, one, just educating people from the get-go in terms of just saying, not only at an impact level, right, it's the right thing to do, you know, to move away from the paradigm of helping women or working with women is social responsibility, we're emotional, we don't deliver commercial returns, but really doing work and having enough proof with founders that we work with that are showing tremendous returns. I think there was a statistic that showed over 63% of female founders actually outperform their male counterparts. No offense to the panel. It's a real thing, right? So I think there just hasn't been enough data to show and tell that story, which we all know, whether it's EdTech or any field, data plays a really important story. So for us, we're really focused on solving for the knowledge gap, I think both at the commercial level in terms of the audience, but also just helping female founders understand the 101s in terms of how to build a startup, how to think about cap tables, how to understand, you know, what venture is, how to make sure that when you raise eventually, you know, you still own a fair amount of your business. So there's a big part of that which we are, I guess, packaging as EdTech, but the crux of it for us, we're really trying to sort of bridge that gap in sort of venture capital and funding of any sort that goes to women of color and just women founders the world across. So it's a group effort, and I'm looking at everybody in this audience to sort of work together to continue that narrative and shift. You know, we almost make up 50% of the population. If it was any other product, that's huge volume, that's huge market potential. And so we're really trying to shift the paradigm and move the narrative on that position. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Tian Chen. I'm a co-founder of Ubuntu, a startup driving intercultural empowerment between African and Chinese youth with using EdTech. And I come from a region where EdTech actually experienced the hardest crackdown by the government, because the government of China believe that EdTech is at the center of the problem for education inequality, because the parents have been using these technologies to drive them into elitist approach. So it's very nice to hear a very different scenario, and EdTech is being used in a very effective way to drive education equality. But my real question is it's so interesting to hear about this international collaborations between Africa and India and different parts of the world to drive the income source into the African market to support the locals. So I'm just wondering, what's your vision for the international collaborations in EdTech in the future? It feels like with lockdown, we should have more collaborations, but in reality, it feels like the world is more segregated, especially in EdTech. So I'm very curious to hear your view on this. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, sure. And if there's anyone else who wants to comment, yeah. So my hope is that, and let me speak specifically about universities, which is where I have partnered with schools before, but the majority of my work has been with universities. I think we've got this interesting feature with universities where we don't even know why we think Harvard's good. Do you know what I mean? It's like we've just got the sense that, like, oh, Harvard, or Stanford. And it's like, do we really understand? Is it because the quality of their teaching and learning is just exponentially better? And there's a much longer conversation around that. But as humans, I'm constantly reminded of the fact that we're not actually very rational. Like, we're mostly emotional creatures with some thinking every now and then. And that irrationality drives a lot of our decision making, and as that relates to decision making around products and services that we might buy and so on, it plays a very big role. Education, in my experience, is a purchase decision largely based on fear. And that might sound like quite a controversial thing to say, but largely, particularly when it comes to choosing which education institution you're going to entrust your intellectual development to, I just don't want to make a mistake. And especially when it comes to my kids, I just don't want to make a mistake. So let me try to rather gravitate towards these institutions that have this kind of allure and this appeal. And my somewhat obsession has been, how can we take these brands that have got this, all of those features working for them, but that have been built, their reputational value has been built based on scarcity. So this idea that like it's so hard to get into Harvard or Stanford and so on, it's because it's prestigious and because it's elitist and because it doesn't let everyone in. And I think that's going to be a hard thing to change in the near future as it relates to the core college experience. But I guess my obsession then is, okay, so if it's still got that same brand allure, what about all the surrounding factors? What about short courses in professional development where you can still leverage this incredible brand and give people this co-association? And how can we think about doing that now in my most recent business, in taking brands like Harvard and others into starting online high schools? And how can we start to think about using that as a vehicle for equity? And I loved what you spoke about in terms of people's exposure, and exposure being such a key driver of how people can imagine their futures. And suddenly, if I'm studying with the University of Cape Town online high school, it's like, what's possible? Like, I've got exposure to Professor Mamageti Pakeng, and she's in these fireside chats with me. It's like, and I'm sitting in rural Limpopo, and it's like, what else is possible if I can get into this institution? So when I think about global collaborations and I think about education institutions, that's what I'm obsessed with, is how can we start to bring the best of those institutions and the reputational glow that they have, and how can we start to inspire new visions of future for people who might otherwise never have had the prospect of studying with those great institutions. And I think that needs to be cross-border. I think that needs to be student groups that are based all over the world. And if anything, that's going to give us a greater sense of empathy for an increasingly globalized economy and society that we're all living in. Yeah. Thoughts?
I think that Rob really touches on some great points, like his example of someone from Limpopo now being involved in the UCT high school is exactly what I experienced when I lived overseas for 4 years at university over there. Within 4 years, I lived with, like as a roommate, was with someone from Saudi Arabia, someone from Hong Kong, someone from Vietnam, and a couple of Americans. And it completely broadens your whole perspective on what the different possibilities are worldwide, not just from an educational perspective, but also from like a career perspective, from, you know, a lifestyle perspective. And the question then is, how do you scale that? And institutions like the UCT Online High School is exactly the way to do so. And I think EdTech is the only means to make this scalable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm getting a signal that we have exceeded time, right? Well, great. She's been waving to the right. But thank you all so much for today. This was amazing. Thank you to the panelists, Rob, and everybody for participating. I'll head on over. Great.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure having you all, and a big thank you to our panelists and to Rob. We really learned a lot just listening to you for the last hour or so, and really appreciate all of your time for being here today and for caring about African EdTech. It means a lot to us to see the ecosystem growing and to have these events again and to be able to engage, especially in person, but in general, to see of energy and enthusiasm for the space is really amazing. So thank you again to everyone. That's all for today. We're really glad you could be here, and we hope to see you at the next one. Thanks so much.
Thank you.